The fort was a lonely place on the edge of everything. It sat in the tall grass like a forgotten box, its wooden walls gray from sun and wind. For a young girl named Elara, it was the whole world. She was 10, but her eyes held a quietness that made her seem older. Her parents, who had come to teach and help, were gone, taken by a sickness 2 winters back. The soldiers at Fort Sentinel let her stay in a small, cold room near the kitchens. They gave her hard bread and thin soup, but no smiles, no kind words. She was a ghost to them, a small, quiet reminder of hard things they didn't want to think about. Her only friend was a doll. She called her Constance. Constance had a face of pale porcelain, with a little chip on the cheek, and her painted blue dress was faded from being held so much. She was the last thing Alara's mother had given her. When the loneliness pressed down, heavy and cold, Alara would talk to Constance. She would tell her about the clouds, or about the memory of her mother's song, her voice a whisper in the empty room. Alara's favorite escape was to climb up to the walkway behind the tall wall of the fort. She would squeeze between 2 rough logs and look out at the endless land. It was there she saw the others, the people who moved with the grass. The soldiers called them names, their voices hard and low. But Alara just watched. She saw them riding on their painted horses, swift and free as the wind. She saw the smoke from their fires curling into the huge sky. They felt as far away as the moon, yet somehow they belonged to this land in a way the fort and the people inside it never could. One afternoon, when the sun was warm and the air smelled of dry earth, Alara was outside the main gate. A gruff soldier had told her to go fetch some kindling for the cook's fire. She was careful, never straying far, her small hands gathering dry sticks. The world was very quiet, just the buzz of insects and the sigh of the grass. Then she heard a sound that didn't belong. It was a soft, hiccuping cry. Like a lost kitten, her heart beat faster. She crouched low, peering through a thicket of brush into a shallow gully. There, sitting in the dirt, was a little girl. She was younger than Alara, maybe 5 or 6. Her dark hair was in 2 long braids, and she wore a dress of soft, tan leather. One knee was scraped raw, and tiny tears made clean lines down her dusty cheeks. The little girl was trying very hard not to sob, but the cries kept escaping. For a long moment, the 2 girls just stared at each other. Fear was a sharp taste in Alara's mouth. All the soldiers' warnings shouted in her head. But looking at this child, she didn't see a threat. She saw a little girl who was hurt and scared and lost. She saw the same loneliness she felt inside the fort walls, just wearing a different face. Slowly, Alara stood up. The little girl flinched, her eyes wide. Alara didn't speak. What words could they share? Instead, she looked down at the doll tucked under her arm. Constance's painted eyes seemed to look back at her. This doll was her last piece of love, her last piece of home. To give her away felt like giving away a piece of her own heart. But the little girl's tears kept falling. Without letting herself think another thought, Alara stepped forward. She knelt down in the dirt, right in front of the child. She held out the doll. Gently, she placed Constance into the little girl's small, open hands. The crying stopped. The little girl looked from the strange, beautiful face of the doll to Alara's face. Her eyes were big and dark, filled with surprise. She touched the doll's chipped cheek, then the faded blue dress. A tiny, wobbly smile touched her lips. It was a small light in the shadowy gully dot. Suddenly, a voice called out from the distance, a sharp word in a language Alara didn't know. The little girl's head snapped up. An older boy, maybe 12, came running over the ridge. He looked at Alara with fierce suspicion, then quickly helped the little girl to her feet. He said something to her, his voice urgent. The little girl clutched Constance tightly to her chest. As the boy led her away, she looked back over her shoulder at Alara. She didn't wave, but she held the doll up just a little. Her eyes locked on Alara's for one more second. Then they were gone, disappearing into the tall grass, as if they had never been there. Alara stood alone in the sudden quiet. The space under her arm felt terribly empty, a cool place where Constance used to be. A part of her wanted to run after them, to ask for her friend back. But a bigger part, a warm part deep in her chest, felt calm. She had done something her mother would have done. She had seen a hurt child and tried to help. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt real. She walked back to the fort, the bundle of sticks in her arms feeling lighter than before. She didn't tell anyone what happened. The soldiers wouldn't understand. That night, in her cold room, she missed the solid feel of Constance. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see the darkness. She saw a little girl's wobbly smile, and the way she had held the doll so close, like a new treasure. And for once, Alara fell asleep, not feeling entirely alone. The morning sun found Alara in the kitchen garden, a small patch of dirt behind the fort, where the cook tried to grow tough greens. Her hands were working the soil, pulling weeds, but her mind was far away in the gully. She could still see the little girl's face, the moment her tears had stopped. The memory was a warm stone in her pocket, a secret comfort. The fort was quiet in that slow, drowsy way of summer mornings. Then a shout cut through the air. It wasn't a normal shout. It was a sharp cry of alarm from the watchtower. One shout became 2, then 3. Then a bell began to clang, a harsh, ugly sound that meant one thing: trouble. Men who had been sleepy and slow suddenly erupted into motion, running for the walls, their boots pounding the hard earth. Officers barked orders, their voices tight with a fear that spread like a chill. Alara froze, a clump of weeds in her hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She scrambled to the base of the inner wall, pressing herself against the rough wood, trying to be small, trying to disappear. From her spot, she could see the soldiers rushing up the ladders to the walkway. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide. They fumbled with their rifles, loading them with shaking hands. The fort's commander, a tired-faced man with a gray mustache, stood on the walkway, staring out. He didn't move. He just stared, and the look on his face made Alara more afraid than all the shouting. She had to see. She had to know what was coming. She found a barrel stacked against the wall and climbed it, peeking between the sharpened points of the palisade. What she saw stole her breath. The wide, rolling hill to the west, usually empty and sleeping under the big sky, was no longer empty. It was alive. A long, dark line stretched across the crest of the hill, like a slow-moving shadow against the bright blue. Horses, and on the horses, riders. They were not charging. They were coming slowly, deliberately, down the slope. There were so many, more than Alara could count. 50, 100, 200, the line kept coming over the hill. Soon, the entire hillside seemed to be moving, covered in a silent, flowing mass of men and horses. Feathers and lances stood up against the sky like a forest that had learned to walk. The sound was a low rumble, the thunder of countless hooves on the dry earth. A sound that you felt in your bones more than heard. 500 warriors. The words were whispered by a soldier next to her, his voice hollow with disbelief. Dear God, it's the whole nation. This was the thing the fort had always feared. The final battle. The end. The soldiers believed it, their faces grim masks of terror and resignation. This was why they had these walls. This was the enemy they talked about in hushed tones at night. And now, here they were. The warriors flowed down the hill like a dark river, and then, just beyond the range of a rifle shot, they stopped. The river became a still, dark lake surrounding 3 sides of the fort. They simply stood there, silently. The only sound was the snort of a horse, the creak of leather. The silence was worse than any war cry. It was heavy. It was waiting. Inside the fort, panic was a living thing. Women and children were herded into the central blockhouse, the strongest building. A young mother clutched a crying baby, her own tears running silently. The blacksmith prayed aloud, his sooty hands clasped together. The fort's commander moved along the wall, his voice low and steady, trying to calm his men. "Hold your fire. Do not shoot. For God's sake, do not shoot unless I give the order." Minutes ticked by, each one an hour. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the tense, quiet standoff. The warriors did not move. They were a wall of painted faces, of watchful eyes. What were they waiting for? Then there was movement. The sea of warriors parted, and a small group rode forward. At its center was an older man on a calm gray horse. His hair was white like snow, and he held himself with a stillness that commanded attention. Beside him, a younger man carried a lance, but tied to it wasn't a scalp or a war banner. It was a piece of cloth, a simple faded calico, fluttering in the breeze. The commander let out a slow breath. "A parley flag," he muttered. He turned to his nervous lieutenant. "They want to talk. Open the small gate. Just me and 2 men." Elara watched, her fingers digging into the wood of the wall. The big main gate stayed shut, but a smaller, heavier door within it swung open with a groan. The commander and 2 soldiers stepped out into the open space between the fort and the army. They looked so small, so terribly alone. The older man on the gray horse rode forward to meet them, his own 2 companions beside him. They met in the middle of the dusty ground, a little island of men between 2 worlds on the brink of violence. Elara could not hear the words. She saw the commander's posture, stiff and wary. She saw the older man, the chief, gesture with his hands. He spoke, and the younger man beside him translated. Then the chief turned and motioned toward his people. From the crowd of warriors, a single rider came forward. It was a young boy on a pony, and sitting in front of him, held safely in his arms, was the little girl from the gully. Ilara's heart leaped into her throat. The girl looked small and serious, but she was not afraid. And clutched tightly in her arms, its faded blue dress bright against the tan leather, was Constance. The doll. The commander stared. He looked from the doll to the little girl, to the chief who was speaking again. The translator's voice, though distant, carried a few clear words to Ilara's straining ears. The girl with no tribe. Her great gift. The heart of a child. The commander's stern face changed. The hard lines of fear and suspicion softened to something else. Confusion and a dawning, staggering understanding. He slowly took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, looking back at the terrified faces of his men on the walls, then at the immense, patient force surrounding them. This was not an attack. This was an answer that the warriors had not come for war. They had come because of a doll, because of a moment of kindness between 2 lost children in a gully. They had come, all 500 of them, for something Elara could not yet understand. And as she watched the little girl hold Constance up for the commander to see, Elara knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that nothing would ever be the same again. The world had shrunk to that patch of dusty ground between the fort's gate and the wall of silent warriors. The air, hot and still, seemed to hold its breath. Up on the wall, Elara watched, her hands so tight on the wood they were white. All she could see was the little girl holding Constance. The sight of her doll, so small and familiar in that vast, scary moment, made her heart ache and soar at the same time. The commander, the tired-faced man everyone called the major, stood with his 2 soldiers. They looked like stones trying not to tremble. Facing them was the old chief on the gray horse. His face was a map of lines, carved by sun and wind and years. His eyes were dark and calm, like the deep water in the fort's well. The chief spoke. His voice was low, a rumble you felt more than heard. The younger man beside him, the one who had brought the little girl forward, listened carefully. He then turned to the major. His English was not perfect, the words coming slowly, carefully, like he was picking his way across a stream on stones. "He is called Gray Bear," the young man began. He gestured to the little girl on the pony. "This one is his granddaughter, the little bird who was lost. She is called Sky That Sings." The major gave a stiff nod, his eyes flicking to the doll. "I see the child. What is your purpose here, with such a gathering?" He could not keep the fear and suspicion from his voice. Gray Bear spoke again, his eyes never leaving the major's face. The translator listened, then spoke. "When the little bird was lost, she was found by a child of your people, a girl with hair the color of dry grass. She was alone. She had nothing." The major frowned, confused. He glanced back at the fort walls, but he could not see Alara hidden among the soldiers. "An orphan girl. What of her?" The chief gestured, a slow, sweeping motion of his hand that took in the little girl, the doll, and then seemed to include the whole wide land. The translator's voice grew more earnest. "The girl with no tribe, she had one piece of power left in this world, one thing of spirit." He pointed directly at Constance. "This, she saw our little bird's tears, and she gave her power away. She gave it to a stranger, to comfort her." The major was silent. He was a man who understood bullets and barricades, treaties and threats. He did not understand this. "The gift was not of cloth and paint," the translator continued, finding the words. "It was a gift of heart, a heart with no family, giving its last piece of comfort to another. This is a strong sign, a sacred thing. My people have seen it. The warriors have seen it." He motioned with his chin to the hundreds of still, watching men behind him. "They are not here to fight. They are here to witness, to see the truth of this sign." The meaning began to dawn on the major, slow and heavy. His stern face softened, not with relief yet, but with a stunned disbelief. "You mean to tell me," he said, his voice quiet, "that all of you came here because a child gave away a toy?" The translator spoke to Gray Bear. The old chief's eyes grew even more serious. He spoke a few words, firm and clear. "Not a toy," the translator corrected gently. "A piece of her spirit. She was a walking ghost with nothing. She gave her only something. This creates a debt of honor. The balance is broken." Now the major understood the word debt. That was a language he knew. His mind, trained for survival, began to race. A debt meant a demand. What would these 500 warriors demand as payment for a doll? Land? Supplies? Horses? His heart sank. The fort had little to give. Gray Bear spoke again, longer this time. His hands moved, shaping the air. He pointed to Alara's doll in his granddaughter's arms. Then he pointed to the fort. Then he opened his hands, palms up, toward his own people. The translator took a moment, piecing it together. "The debt is not with you, the men of wood and iron," he said to the major. "The debt is with the ghost girl. But such a debt touches all. To make the balance right, a gift must be given in return. A gift of equal weight." The major braced himself. "What gift?" The chief's answer, when it came through the translator, was not what anyone expected. "The gift is a place, a voice. The ghost girl has no people. We will give her a people. She will sit in the lodge of Gray Bear. She will be a sister to sky that sings. She will have a family. This is our gift." A stunned silence fell over the men at the gate. Up on the wall, Elara could not hear all the words, but she saw the Major's back straighten in surprise. But Gray Bear was not finished. He spoke once more, his gaze sweeping the fort's walls. "And for you, who let the ghost girl live in your shadow, we give a gift also. For one cycle of the seasons from this green grass to the next green grass, no warrior of our band will raise a hand to you. Your people may walk to the river. Your hunters may go for game. We will trade at this spot in peace. This is our word, witnessed by all." The Major stood perfectly still. The offer was so vast, so unexpected, it was like being offered a drink of cool water in a desert. Peace, for a whole year. It could save his struggling fort. It could save lives. All of it hinging on a single, silent act of kindness he hadn't even known about. He looked at the little girl, Sky That Sings, who was now smiling shyly, cuddling the porcelain doll. He looked back at the grim, hopeful faces of his own men on the walls. He thought of the lonely orphan who had somehow, without knowing, changed everything. His voice was thick when he finally spoke. "And the girl? She has a choice?" The translator nodded. "The gift must be given freely. It must be accepted freely. This is the way." The Major turned and looked up, his eyes searching the wall until they found Elara's small, pale face peering down. He saw the confusion and fear in her eyes. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod, a look that was no longer the distant look of a commander to a nuisance, but the look of a man who finally sees a person. The weight of it all settled on Elara. This immense thing, this gathering of hundreds, this offer of peace was because of her, because of Constance. They were asking her to leave the only world she knew, to go with them, to have a family. The silence of the 500 warriors waited. The future of the fort waited. And in the center of it all, held in a little girl's arms, was a chipped porcelain doll, waiting to see if her gift would be accepted. The silence that followed the chief's words was the loudest thing Elara had ever heard. It buzzed in her ears, thick and heavy. All those eyes, the dark, waiting eyes of the warriors, the pale, anxious eyes of the soldiers on the wall felt like they were pressing on her skin. The Major was looking right at her, and his face was asking a question without making a sound. He turned back to the chief and the translator. "The girl must understand," he said, his voice rough. "She must hear it from you." Gray Bear gave a single, slow nod. He spoke softly to the young man, who then looked up at the wall. He did not shout. He simply spoke in a clear, steady voice, meant to carry. "Girl with hair like dry grass," he called. "Will you come down?" Every muscle in Elara's body wanted to freeze, to become part of the wooden wall. A soldier near her nudged her gently. "Go on, child," he whispered, his own fear replaced by a stunned curiosity. "It's you they're talking to." Her legs felt like they were made of straw, but they moved. She climbed down the ladder from the walkway, each rung a step into a dream that was not hers. The eyes of the fort people followed her, the cook wiping his hands on his apron, the blacksmith's wife peering from a doorway. They were seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. The small gate was still open. The Major stood there, and he stepped aside to let her pass. For a moment, she stood in the shadow of the fort, the only home she had known for 2 years. Then she took one step, and then another, out into the open sunlight. The space between the fort and the warriors felt vast as an ocean. The little girl, Sky That Sings, was still on her pony, holding Constance. When she saw Elara, her face lit up with a bright, unmistakable smile. It was a simple, happy look, the same look she had given in the gully. That smile was a tiny anchor in the storm of Elara's fear. She walked until she stood beside the major, but her eyes were on the little girl and the doll. The translator spoke to her now, his voice kinder. The chief says your gift was a strong thing. It came from a heart with no shelter. You gave your last piece of comfort to his granddaughter. This has power. My people wish to thank you. They wish to give you a shelter for your heart. Alara looked from the translator to the old chief. Gray Bear's eyes were serious, but they were not cruel. They were the eyes of her grandfather, if she had ever had one. They offer you a place in their family, the translator continued. You would live in Gray Bear's lodge. You would be a sister to Sky that sings. You would have a mother and a father again, in their way. You would learn our ways. This is their gift to you, for your gift to them. Alara's mind swam. A family. The word was like a distant song she had almost forgotten. She thought of her cold room, of the soldiers who looked through her. She thought of the empty silence that followed her everywhere inside the walls. But then she thought of the unknown. The strange language, the different food, the life under a hide tent instead of a wooden roof. The sheer size and wildness of the people on the horses terrified her. And if I say no? Her voice was a small, dry leaf of a sound. The translator spoke to the chief. Gray Bear's expression did not change. He answered, and the young man translated. Then you may go back inside the walls. The debt will be unanswered. The balance will remain broken. But we will still keep our word to these men for one season. Our word on that is solid. But the greater gift, the gift to you, would be lost. It was not a threat to her. It was just the truth. The offer was there, and it would not come again. The major knelt down on one knee beside her, bringing his face level with hers. He smelled of wool and tobacco. Alara, he said, using her name for the first time she could remember. I cannot tell you what to do, but I will tell you what I see. I see a chance for peace here, because of you. A real peace that could save many lives. I also see, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I see a child who has been alone in a crowd for 2 years. They are offering you a family. It is a different world. A hard world, maybe? But it is a world where you would be seen. He stood up, leaving the choice hanging in the air before her. Alara looked back at the fort. It stood grim and gray, a cage that had kept her safe, but had also kept her starving for a kind word, for a touch on the hair, for a shared laugh. She looked at the chief, his patience as deep as the earth. She looked at the little girl on the pony sky dash that sings. Seeing Alara look at her, did something then. She held out the doll, Constance, offering her back. It was a child's gesture, simple and clear. Asterisk, this is yours. You can have her back. Asterisk, that tiny act broke the last bit of fear in Alara's heart. This was not a people who took. They were people who gave back. They understood the value of a doll. She took a deep, shaking breath. She looked at the little girl and shook her head. She pointed from the doll to the girl's heart, and then she put her own hand over her own heart. She is yours now. Then she turned to the translator and the chief. She didn't have the words, so she just nodded. A single definite nod, a change went through the hundreds of warriors. It was not a sound, but a movement, like a great wind passing through grass. Shoulders relaxed. Heads tilted in respect. Gray Bear's stern face softened, and he gave a slow, deep nod. In return, the translator smiled. It is good. The major let out a long breath he seemed to have been holding for hours. Then we have an agreement, he said to the chief, his voice firm now with relief and purpose. Gray Bear spoke again, and the translator relayed the final piece. The agreement must be made solid in the way of both peoples. There will be a giving and a receiving at this spot now. Let the girl bring what is hers. Let our people give what is hers to become. Alara was led back into the fort, not to her cold room, but to the major's own quarters. The soldiers moved with a new, hurried energy. A woman, the wife of a lieutenant, came with a small cloth bag. She helped Alara fold her one other dress, her worn-out shawl, and the tiny, smooth stone she kept under her pillow. It was all she owned in the world. "You are a brave one," the woman said, her eyes bright with tears she would not shed. A brave, good girl. When Alara walked back out the gate, her small bag in hand, the scene had changed. The wall of warriors had opened. In the front, several women had come forward on their horses. One of them, her face kind and her dress decorated with beautiful, swirling beads, slid from her saddle and walked toward Elara. In her hands was a new dress. It was made of the softest tan deerskin Elara had ever seen. It was decorated with bright blue and yellow beads, in patterns that looked like flowers and flowing rivers. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever been offered. The woman did not speak English. She simply held the dress out to Alara with a smile that reached her eyes. It was the smile of a mother. This was the exchange. Her old, lonely life in a bag for a new, beautiful dress and a place to belong. The balance was being restored, right there in the dust. And for the first time, Elara felt not like a ghost, but like a person who was about to step into a story she could not yet read. The woman with the kind eyes held the beaded dress, and her hands did not waver. She was waiting for Alara to take it. Around them, the world was holding its breath, the fort with its fear, the warriors with their solemn promise, the wide sky with its blank blue stare. Elara looked at the dress. The beads caught the sun, throwing little spots of light like blue and yellow birds on the ground. She thought of her own dress, the rough gray wool, scratchy and too short at the wrists. She thought of what the dress in the woman's hands meant. It wasn't just cloth. It was a door. If she took it, she was walking through that door and letting the one behind her swing shut forever. She glanced back at the fort. The major gave her a small, encouraging nod. The cook, a gruff man who had only ever shoved a bowl at her, actually lifted a hand in a clumsy wave. It was a goodbye. They were already letting her go. Her eyes found the little girl on the pony. Sky That Sings was watching her, one small arm wrapped tightly around Constance. She looked hopeful and a little worried, as if she thought Elara might still say no. That decided it. Elara reached out. Her fingers, small and stained with garden dirt, touched the soft, supple leather of the dress. It felt alive, like it was meant to move with her. She took its weight into her arms. The woman's smile deepened as she gave a satisfied nod. She then gently took Elara's old cloth bag, holding it not like trash, but like something that held a story that was now finished. Another woman came forward. She carried a pair of soft moccasins, decorated with a simple line of beads. She knelt right there in the dust and helped Elara take off her worn, hard-soled shoes. She slipped the moccasins onto Elara's feet. They fit perfectly. They felt like wearing nothing at all, and like being rooted to the earth at the same time. Then, the woman who had given the dress took Elara's hand. She led her a few steps away from the major, toward the chief and the little girl on the pony. With gentle hands, she helped Elara pull the old wool dress over her head. For a second, Elara stood in her thin underclothes, feeling the sun and the wind on her skin, feeling terribly exposed in front of hundreds. But then the new deerskin dress was slipped over her head. It settled on her shoulders, cool and smooth and smelling of smoke and sage. The woman's hands were quick, tying the front with a thin leather thong. She smoothed the dress down, her touch firm and motherly. She then reached up and, with a gentle tug, pulled the plain leather tie from Elara's hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders. She produced a new tie, this one with a single, small blue feather woven into it, and secured her hair back with it. It was a transformation that took only a minute. But when it was done, Ilara was not the same girl. She stood taller. The dress made her feel part of the land, not separate from it. She was no longer the orphan of Fort Sentinel. She was someone new, someone just beginning. Gray Bear spoke a single word. The young man on the pony beside Sky That Sings leaned down and lifted Ilara up, placing her on the pony in front of the little girl. Sky That Sings giggled, a happy, bubbly sound, and wrapped her free arm around Ilara's waist, holding her tight. She still clutched Constance with the other. From his horse, Gray Bear looked at the Major one last time. He raised his hand, palm open. "One cycle," he said in his deep voice, the words clear even without translation. "Our word is here." He placed his open hand over his own heart. The Major placed his own hand over his heart and bowed his head. "One cycle. Our thanks are here." And with that, it was done. The chief turned his horse. The great gathering of warriors began to move, not as a charging army, but as a people turning to go home. The river of horses and men began to flow back toward the hills. Ilara, sitting on the pony, looked back only once. She saw the fort, smaller now, its gates still open, the men standing on the walls watching them go. They looked like toy soldiers from this distance,